Hello, my name is Claire Adams. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an education coordinator at the Space Science Institute, where we work with public libraries across the country to bring STEM education programs to their patrons. We are located in Boulder, Colorado, which is traditionally Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute land. This presentation is about strengthening diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in STEM learning. Many groups continue to be underrepresented in STEM fields. It is important to examine our social structures and education strategies so that everyone has the tools they need to have equitable access and be included in science, technology, engineering, and math. These two illustrations show the evolution of where we've gone from before just thinking we could provide the same resources to everyone and that would be equal, to now knowing that everyone has different needs in order to be met, in order to be successful. And also the evolution we've gone from exclusionary practices in education to inclusionary practices. One challenge in addressing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is the language. Many different terms can have different meanings, so specified definitions are important. So we'll start with culture. Culture is a system of behavior that helps us act in an accepted or familiar way. This leads us to cultural awareness, being cognizant, observant, and conscious of similarities and differences among and between cultural groups. And while cultural awareness is great, it is important for us to act with cultural humility. So this term was coined in 1998 in the healthcare field by physicians Melanie Turvalon and Jan Murray Garcia. So cultural humility entails a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique, to correcting power imbalances, and to develop mutually beneficial partnerships with communities. So cultural humility means being open to criticism. In every context, we are learners. Having cultural humility means to look beyond our personal experiences and examine our institutional systems. Asking questions like, who is invited to the table? Whose voices are being heard? And who is listening? Ask yourselves these questions when you are in charge of leading an educational program. What stories are you perpetuating or uncovering? Next, we have stereotype. So a stereotype is an exaggerated belief, image, or distorted truth about a person or group, a generalization that allows for little or no individual differences or social variation. And since I work with librarians, I put up this image. There is a stereotype of librarians as being a white woman, maybe a little bit older in age, and who's constantly shushing and trying to keep a very quiet environment. If you've been to a library recently, this is no longer the case. Libraries are places for informal learning, where they're doing STEM education that is loud and messy and exploratory. And a librarian that you work with may or may not look like the stereotypical image. So thinking of stereotypes, I want you to picture this scenario. After scrubbing down, a surgeon walks into surgery for a routine appendectomy. The surgeon greets the patient and the surgical team, tells the patient about the process of the surgery, and then instructs the anesthesiologist to begin the anesthesia process. A surgical nurse assists in the anesthesia process while another continues to organize the surgical instruments. Once the patient is fully under, the surgeon turns to one of the nurses and says, "Let's get started. Scalpel, please." Now, in your mental picture, what race and gender was the surgeon? What race and gender was the nurse? Where does that mental picture come from? Really consider, what is the impact? When we have stereotypes in our heads, it can really lead to accessibility issues. If a young girl doesn't see herself as being a doctor someday, she never will be. So breaking through these stereotypes, and especially not reinforcing them in our educational programs, is very important. Stereotypes tell an incomplete story. They can help us make sense of the world, but they are categories that have really gone too far. and they relate to the implicit biases we then hold. So an implicit bias is the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understandings, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. There is a neurological explanation to them. They can be the brain's way of dealing with too much information. Every moment, we receive 11 billion bits of information, but we can only process 40 bits. Implicit bias is not a reflection of who we are, it's the product of systemic messages all around us. But it is up to us to confront, identify, and critically examine our biases. I would present you another scenario. For a Lunar New Year celebration, library staff recruit volunteers and hire a group to perform a traditional lion dance. On the day of the celebration, a volunteer is checking in attendees and asks a person who appears Asian, "Oh, are you related to the performers?" The person responds, "I am not. Are you asking me that because I'm Asian?" The volunteer quickly replies, "I didn't mean anything by it." Now consider, how might implicit bias play a role in this interaction? And what might a response that draws on cultural humility look like? It is really important to always remember impact is greater than intent. So the impact that you've had on a patron or customer or student, that is the more important thing than what you intended by it. So really try to draw on that cultural humility if something like this happens in your work. And I invite you to consider, what are some examples from your work in which implicit bias affects decision-making, behaviors, or interactions with colleagues or the community you work with? Now, we're going to talk about putting this into practice. And these are just some things that we have done at the Space Science Institute to try to strengthen DEIA in our organization. So the first thing we did, last summer, we created a diversity task force. We meet once a month, and it is a group of people from every single department interested in strengthening these areas. And we discuss topics such as hiring practices and examining our own culture within the organization and trying to identify things that are inclusive and where we can strengthen that, and maybe identify areas of growth where we might not be the most welcoming place. Next, seek out trainings for your organization. We just underwent 3 trainings in the last month from the American Library Association. So that really focuses on libraries, but you might be able to find trainings focused or more related to what you do in your organization. Next, we've been compiling DEIA resources to share. There's a lot of literature out there and a lot of resources that can be shared within the field. And finally, we've really been looking at research-based strategies and trying to implement those into our educational programs. SciGirls is one resource that's great. Their approach is rooted in research on how to engage girls in STEM. So they've come up with 6 different strategies that are research-based, and then have tips on how to implement those strategies within educational programs. They are great. I have a lot of their resources in the resource list that I'll be sharing with you at the end of this presentation. Another thing that we've really been trying to do is have diverse representation within our educational programs. Remember, you cannot be what you cannot see. So try your best to include role models across all facets of identity, including but not limited to age, race, religion, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, gender, and ability. Going back to SciGirls, they have a whole list of role models in STEM fields that you can contact and that you can help implement in some way into your programs, whether as guest speakers or they have video snippets that are really easy to just incorporate into different programs that have to do with science, technology, engineering, and math. And that's all located in the resource list I will share with you. At this link, which I'll drop in the chat, these are additional resources for strengthening this work. Just remember, this is ongoing work, and this short presentation is a tiny drop in the bucket. Strengthening DEIA is everybody's everyday work, especially as educators, and it's an ongoing process. There are no credentials for completing this work, so I encourage you to explore many different models to find the one that fits your group. And again, for more resources, check out this link. Thank you so much. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. You can always reach me at my email at cratcliffe@spacescience.org. Thank you so much.